The morning Marcus Chen decided to trust Karen Rivera was the exact moment his life began its slow, inevitable collapse. Though he wouldn't know it yet, he was too busy being grateful. "You're a lifesaver," he said, genuine warmth in his voice as he poured her a cappuccino in his kitchen. Steam rose in delicate spirals, carrying the rich aroma of his expensive Italian espresso machine. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, the pool glimmered like a liquid gem, 9,000 gallons of chlorinated perfection that he'd spent six figures installing just 18 months ago. Karen sat on one of his designer bar stools, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and smiled with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. She was 43 but looked 35, the kind of ageless that comes from dedication, personal trainers, dermatologists, the right skincare line that she probably sold at her MLM. Her honey blonde hair was perfectly highlighted, her nails immaculate, her jewelry tastefully expensive without being ostentatious. She was the kind of woman who made other women feel inadequate without even trying. "Family emergency in Phoenix," she continued, crossing her legs, the movement deliberate and practiced. "My sister's having complications with her pregnancy. I need to be there for the delivery, could be weeks." Marcus nodded, already opening his laptop on the counter. At 47, he'd learned to trust his instincts about people, and his instincts said Karen Rivera was reliable. They'd been neighbors for 3 years. She ran a successful real estate business, drove a Tesla Model S that cost more than his truck, and always paid her bills on time. He'd hired her to sell his late mother's house 6 months ago, and she'd closed it in 30 days for 3% above asking. Competence, he'd learned, was sexy. "I need someone I trust to watch the place," Karen said. "Water the garden, check on things. The alarm company will alert both of us if anything happens. But I need someone here, you know, someone physical, a presence." Marcus had suggested his nephew, 22-year-old David, who was between jobs and needed somewhere to crash. But Karen had vetoed that with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "No offense, but kids that age throw parties," she'd said. "I need an adult, someone responsible." Which was how Marcus, divorced, successful, with a home security system that rivaled Fort Knox, and a reputation in his commercial real estate firm as someone who didn't miss details, had volunteered himself. "I'd be happy to watch the place," he'd said. "When?" 2 weeks from tomorrow. Can you do it?" 2 weeks was nothing. Marcus had been planning to spend his summer working on a development deal in the Pearl District. But Karen's house was only 12 minutes away. He could stay at her place, do some remote work, keep an eye on things. It wasn't a hardship. "Consider it done," he'd said. That had been 7 days ago. Now sitting in his own kitchen, watching Karen sip her cappuccino with the satisfaction of someone who'd solved a major problem, Marcus felt a flutter of something. Not attraction. He'd learned to be careful about that, especially with neighbors, but something like admiration. Karen had a presence that filled a room. She made decisions quickly and expected them to be executed perfectly. She'd been divorced twice, she'd mentioned once, and both times it had been the husband's fault for not appreciating her. "I'm so glad I can count on you," Karen said, reaching over and squeezing his arm. Her touch lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Honestly, Marcus, there aren't many men left who you can just trust, you know." "Happy to help," he said, pulling his arm back gently, grabbing a coffee cup from the cabinet. "Really." "The thing is," Karen continued, not quite letting the moment die, "I'll feel so much safer knowing you're here. Your place is bigger, nicer, you've got everything. But mine. My car, actually, my Tesla, that's my baby." "Your car," Marcus smiled, confused. "It's got the best security system on the market," Karen explained, warming to the subject with visible enthusiasm. "Sentry mode, cameras everywhere, motion sensors. If anyone even thinks about approaching my property, the car recognizes it and starts recording. And it can alert me instantly on my phone, no matter where I am in the world. Plus, it's right there by the front entrance. Anyone sees a $90,000 Tesla, they think twice about messing with the place." Marcus nodded. He'd read about Sentry Mode. It was impressive technology. "That's smart." "It's more than smart," Karen said, and there was something almost zealous in her tone. "It's basically an intelligent guard system. My insurance company actually gives me a discount because of it. They consider the Tesla a legitimate security asset." She paused, tilting her head. "In fact, I'm actually thinking about parking it by your pool, the one you're so worried about." Marcus blinked. "My pool." "You've mentioned it like 5 times in the past week," Karen laughed. The HOA thing with the lawsuit, the worry that someone could damage it, liability issues. Right, Marcus said slowly. The Hendersons want to take everyone to court over the shared water drainage situation. The neighborhood had a complicated agreement about water runoff. When Marcus had installed his pool, he'd used certified engineers, followed every code, paid for proper drainage systems. But the Hendersons, 3 houses down, were claiming that summer runoff from the pool was affecting their foundation. It was almost certainly not true. The drainage was state-of-the-art, but they were litigious people, and litigation was expensive. So park the car by the pool, Karen said, and it's like having a security guard. Anyone tries anything, we've got footage. The Hendersons won't dare try whatever they're planning. I don't think they're planning to. Better safe than sorry, Karen interrupted smoothly. Trust me, Marcus. My car has saved me from 3 break-ins in my neighborhood. Just the presence of it, plus knowing the security cameras are working. It's a miracle worker. Marcus looked out at his pool, glittering innocently in the afternoon sun. The weather forecast was clear for the entire week. Just like always, perfect California summer. I don't know if that's necessary. Look, you're worried about it. I'm offering a free security solution. Karen stood, moving to stand beside him at the window. She was close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and subtle. Anything happens to that pool while I'm gone, you'll never forgive yourself, but with my car parked right there, it's covered, it's safe. You can relax. There was something in the way she said it, so certain, so absolute, that made it difficult to argue. Karen had that quality, the ability to make you believe that her solutions were not just good, but inevitable. It was probably why she was so successful in real estate. Okay, Marcus heard himself say, if you really think it'll help. I know it will, Karen said, and she smiled, that confident, brilliant smile that had probably closed 1,000 deals. You're going to be so glad we did this. The following Tuesday, Marcus pulled into Karen's driveway at 6 in the evening with 2 suitcases and a laptop bag. The Tesla sat in its usual spot in front of the triple garage, pristine white, gleaming like a spaceship that had landed on suburban asphalt. Karen had already left. Her flight was at 3. The house was empty when Marcus let himself in with the key she'd left on his porch, sealed in an envelope with, "For Marcus," written in her neat handwriting. He unpacked upstairs in the guest bedroom, a light, airy space that probably cost more to design than his entire bedroom furniture, and then took a tour of the house. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, granite countertops, recessed lighting, smart home system that Karen had spent 20 minutes showing him how to use. If you need anything, she'd said, you just ask the system. It learns. The house was immaculate, too immaculate. There were no books on the shelves, no family photos on the walls. It was like living in a showroom, beautiful and somehow completely without personality. By Tuesday evening, Marcus was settled. He ordered Thai food, set up his laptop at Karen's dining room table, and opened the development deal files. Work was usually what he needed to feel grounded, to feel like himself. But tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the silence. Karen's house felt too quiet, careful quiet, like it was waiting for something. Or maybe it was that, around 8 p.m., Marcus walked by the front window and saw his pool through the gap between the houses. And parked between his property and hers, he could just make out the Tesla's distinctive silhouette. He'd texted Karen, "Car looks good, all set." She'd responded immediately, "Perfect, relax, everything's under control, my car's got you covered." Marcus went to bed that night with a strange feeling in his chest. Not quite dread, not quite anticipation. Just a low-level buzzing uncertainty, the kind of thing you can't quite name. By Wednesday, he'd almost forgotten about the car entirely. Work was demanding. He had conference calls with contractors, meetings via Zoom with his business partners, a site inspection to do virtually. By Thursday, he'd fully normalized the presence of the Tesla. It was just there, part of the landscape. Karen had been right. There was something reassuring about seeing that expensive vehicle sitting near his pool like a sentinel. Thursday night, Marcus ordered dinner from the place Karen had recommended and found himself thinking about her. Not in a romantic way, exactly. More in a way that suggested his mind was looking for something to occupy itself with besides the crushing work deadlines and his upcoming court hearing about the pool drainage dispute. Karen called him that night around 9. He was surprised to hear her voice crack slightly when she spoke. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "With the house, with my car?" Everything's perfect, Marcus assured her. How's your sister? In surgery, Karen said quietly. They think the baby might not. It's touch and go. My brother-in-law is losing his mind. Marcus expressed his sympathies. He asked the right questions. He listened to Karen talk about her sister's medical history, about the complications with gestational diabetes, about the fear of losing the baby. He heard genuine pain in her voice, and something in him softened. Karen was a human being. Whatever confidence and bravado she projected, underneath was someone who loved her sister and was terrified of losing her. Thank you for being there, Karen said finally. Knowing you're at the house, that my car is helping protect your pool. It's one less thing to worry about. Of course, Marcus said. How long do you think you'll be in Phoenix? They're saying at least another week, probably 2. We'll know more after the surgery tomorrow. After they hung up, Marcus found himself looking out at the Tesla again. In the moonlight, it looked almost alive, a watchdog made of metal and algorithms, sitting vigil by his pool. Friday brought the first rain in 8 weeks. It started innocuously enough, around 4 p.m. A few drops, the kind of thing that made Californians check the weather app in confusion. But by evening, it had developed into something more serious, a genuine storm system, the kind that meteorologists said was driven by an unusual weather pattern pushing up from Mexico. The news reported 30-40 mph winds. Flash flood warnings were issued for some neighborhoods. It wasn't dangerous exactly, but it was unusual enough that people paid attention. Marcus found himself tracking the storm with the intensity he usually reserved for business deals. He checked the news every 30 minutes. He looked at the live weather radar. He watched the rain intensify from light drizzle to steady downpour to something that was almost aggressive in its commitment. Around 10 p.m., he stepped outside onto Karen's back porch under the covered awning and looked toward his house. The pool lights were on. He'd left them on deliberately, wanting to be able to see if any branches fell into the water. The water was churning now, agitated by wind and rain, no longer the placid blue rectangle it had been. Leaves were accumulating in the skimmer baskets. A branch had already fallen into the deep end. The Tesla was barely visible through the darkness and rain, but he could make out its form. He texted Karen, "Storm's picking up, winds rough." She called immediately. How bad? Her voice was alert, sharp. Whatever she'd been doing, she was fully present now. Not terrible, Marcus assured her. Just unusual. The news is calling it a rare weather system. Is my car okay? Yeah, it's fine. It's just a car, it'll be. Is it moving? Karen interrupted. Do you see it moving? Marcus blinked. Moving, Karen, the car's parked. It's not going to. Check on it, she said. There was something almost frantic in her tone. Can you check on it right now? I need to know it's secure. It's a car, Marcus said, but he was already moving toward the door. It has a parking brake. It's not going anywhere. Please, just check. There was something in her voice, genuine fear, not the manufactured anxiety of someone being overly cautious, but something deeper. Something that made Marcus step out into the rain despite the cold wind and the assault of water. He walked the 30 feet from Karen's porch to the property line, holding his arms up against the wind. The rain was coming in sideways now, driven by gusts that made the trees bend. His shoes sank slightly into the soil. The ground was already oversaturated. The Tesla was where he'd left it, parked carefully between their 2 properties, near the edge of his pool, exactly where Karen had suggested. It gleamed white even through the rain and darkness, its hull washed clean by the downpour. It's fine, Marcus called into the phone, walking closer. It's right where. He stopped. The rear tires seemed lower than the front, or maybe that was just an optical illusion. The ground was soft. Everything was soft, actually. The earth around the pool was turning into something closer to mud than soil. Marcus, Karen's voice crackled through the phone. It's fine, he repeated, but his confidence had wavered slightly. I'm sure it's fine, the parking brake. Thunder cracked directly overhead, and the lights in both houses flickered. Get back inside, Karen said sharply. Don't stay out there. Marcus jogged back to the porch, rain-soaked and shivering. Inside, the house smelled like rain and something else he couldn't identify. Fear, maybe, or anticipation, or just the ozone smell that came with electrical storms. It's fine, he assured Karen again. The car's solid. Okay, she said, but she didn't sound reassured. Okay, thank you for checking, just Keep an eye on it, okay? Please. I will, Marcus said. He didn't know then that he was making a promise he wouldn't be able to keep. The storm worsened around midnight. Marcus was still up, still tracking the situation when the power went out. Completely. Not a flicker. Just black and the sudden silence of every electronic device dying simultaneously. He grabbed his phone, 33% battery, and turned on the flashlight. The house settled around him, now just a structure, no longer a smart home. The walls seemed closer somehow. The silence seemed heavier. The storm was still raging outside. He could hear it even through the walls and windows. The rain like machine gun fire, the wind like something alive and angry, testing the integrity of the building. Marcus went to the window. Even with the phone flashlight, he could barely see anything. The Tesla was completely invisible now, swallowed by darkness and weather. He tried texting Karen, but the message wouldn't send. No cell service. The storm had probably knocked out a tower. He sat on Karen's couch, expensive, uncomfortable, all form and no function, and waited for the power to return. It didn't. Midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m., then 2 a.m., and the storm was still there, relentless, as if it had settled into a permanent residence on top of the neighborhood. Around 3 a.m., Marcus finally fell asleep, exhausted and cold, his phone clutched in his hand. When he woke, the power was back on. Sunlight was streaming through the windows. The storm had passed. It was Saturday morning, 7:43 a.m. For a moment, Marcus just lay on Karen's uncomfortable couch and felt grateful. The worst had passed. Everything was probably fine. The car was almost certainly fine. His pool was probably fine. Everything was. His phone rang. It was a local news number. "Is this Marcus Chen?" The voice was official, calm in that way that meant bad news was coming. "Yes," Marcus said slowly. "Sir, this is Officer Patricia Montoya with the County Emergency Management Office. We have a situation at your property. There's been some structural movement in the area due to the storm surge and ground saturation. We need you to come assess the damage immediately." The damage, not to see if there's any damage. Damage, as in damage had already happened. "I'll be right there," Marcus said, and he was already moving, already grabbing his keys. He made it to his house in 7 minutes, driving fast enough that the tires squealed on wet pavement. The first thing he noticed was the county workers, 3 of them in vests examining the ground near the pool. The second thing he noticed was that his pool deck, the beautiful, expensive, professionally installed pool deck, had a crack in it, not a hairline fracture. A genuine crack, 3 feet long, running from the deep end toward the equipment shed. The third thing he noticed was the Tesla. It was at the edge of the pool, about 6 feet from the deep end, listing slightly. It had sunk into the ground maybe 2 feet. The earth around it had settled, compacting, and the car, designed to be light, to be efficient, to float in floods, was now sitting in its own personal depression like an egg in a too large nest. The white paint was mud-streaked. The rear tires were completely submerged in the oversaturated soil. "Christ," Marcus whispered. "Sir," Officer Montoya approached him, her uniform still wet from the night's weather. "You're the property owner." "Yes," Marcus managed. "What happened?" "The ground shifted," she said, gesturing toward the pool. "We had soil saturation that exceeded 140% in some areas. Basically, the ground became unstable. Your pool has advanced drainage systems, professional installation, I assume." Marcus nodded mutely. "That's both good and bad news," the officer continued. "Good news, your pool didn't collapse. Bad news, all that water had to go somewhere. It pushed laterally, destabilized the surrounding area. And that vehicle," she gestured toward the Tesla, "parked too close to the edge, too much weight in one place. Ground couldn't support it, it sank." "It sank," Marcus repeated stupidly. "Not into the pool," the officer clarified. "Into the ground, but another 6 inches of rain and it might have gone into the pool. You'd be looking at totaling it." She paused. "Whose car is it?" "My neighbor's," Marcus heard himself say. "She asked me to park it here as security." The officer exchanged a look with one of the other workers, the kind of look that suggested she'd seen this kind of thing before. Not the sinking car specifically, but the particular flavor of human error that led to sinking cars. "Well," she said finally, "I'd get it towed out of here before the ground settles any further. Could damage the undercarriage." The call to Karen went through at 8:15 a.m. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy. Marcus, is everything okay? Did the storm? Your car, he said, and he heard his voice crack slightly. Karen, your car sank. There was a pause, then, what do you mean sank? Into the ground, the saturation from the storm, the ground shifted, and the car, it sank. It's still there, but it's partially submerged in mud. My phone won't let me send pictures, but it's bad. It's really bad. Another pause, longer this time. You were supposed to watch it, Karen said quietly. I did watch it. I couldn't control a geological event, the officer said. You parked it there, Karen interrupted, and now her voice had the edge of a blade. You parked my $90,000 car on the edge of your pool in a spot I specifically chose for security purposes, and you let it sink into the ground. You asked me to park it there, Marcus said, hearing the defensive note in his own voice. You said it would be perfect, you said. I said park it there as a security asset. I didn't say park it there and then let it get destroyed in a storm. Karen's voice was rising now, the polite facade cracking to reveal something colder underneath. Do you have any idea how much a Tesla costs to repair? Do you have any idea what the salvage value is for a car that's been partially submerged in contaminated mud? Karen, it's not my fault. You have insurance, she said sharply. Full comprehensive, I assume, for a property like yours. Yes, but... Get me a check, she said. Get me a check for the full replacement value of the car, or I'm hearing a lawyer. You specifically agreed to watch my vehicle. I trusted you, and you failed. The storm was unprecedented. The weather service. I don't care about the weather service, Karen said flatly. I care about my car. I care about the fact that I left my property in your hands and you destroyed my vehicle. Fix this, Marcus. Fix it, or we'll do this through lawyers. She hung up. Marcus stood there in the mud and rain-dampened air, his phone still pressed to his ear, and felt the moment when everything shifted. Not the ground this time. Something else. Something between him and Karen, between obligation and resentment, between neighborly goodwill and the knowledge of what happened when trust was broken. The Tesla sat in its hole, white paint glittering mockingly in the morning sun. And Marcus realized, with the clarity that only comes from absolute disaster, that he had made a terrible mistake. It came via email at 6:47 a.m. from a firm he'd never heard of, Rivera, Castellano and Associates. The letterhead was aggressive, all sharp lines and power colors. The message was simple. Within 24 hours, he was to provide written correspondence regarding the damages sustained by Karen Rivera's 2021 Tesla Model S Plaid, including estimates from certified repair facilities and insurance documentation. Marcus read it 3 times, hoping the words would change. They didn't. By 7:30 a.m., he'd called his own insurance company. By 8:00 a.m., he was on the phone with his attorney, a man named Robert Huang who'd handled his divorce 5 years earlier and had the tired bearing of someone who'd seen too many people make stupid decisions. Did you invite her to park the car on your property? Huang asked, his voice carrying that lawyer-specific tone of speaking to a child. She asked me to, for security purposes. Security purposes, Huang repeated flatly. You let someone park a $90,000 vehicle on your property too? Guard it. The Tesla has cameras, motion detection. She said it would help keep my pool secure from people wanting to damage it. The neighborhood dispute with the Hendersons, you know. There was a long pause. Marcus could practically hear Huang recalculating his legal strategy. Marcus, Huang said finally, that is, without question, one of the least defensible things you could possibly have let happen on your property. I didn't cause the storm. No, but you invited a vehicle onto your property that you then failed to adequately protect. Did you check the stability of the ground before agreeing to the arrangement? No, the weather forecast was clear. There was no indication. Did you check the location she wanted to park it? Did you assess whether it was safe? Marcus felt his stomach drop. No. Did you move the vehicle when the storm started? I was going to, but the storm was bad and... Stop, Huang said. You don't have to explain this to me. I'm just establishing how thoroughly you've screwed yourself. He paused, typing something. Here's what's going to happen. Her insurance will file against your homeowner's policy. Your policy will increase dramatically. You'll likely be found partially or wholly liable, depending on whether the court believes her claim that you invited the car onto the property specifically to protect your pool. But the Tesla's security system is what caused this whole thing. Marcus protested. She sold me on the idea that her car would be a security measure. I didn't. Doesn't matter, Huang interrupted. What matters is what can be proven. And what can be proven is, you permitted her to park her vehicle on your property, you failed to move it when weather conditions deteriorated, and her vehicle was damaged as a result. Marcus felt something in his chest tighten. How much am I looking at? Tesla Model S Plaid, 2021 model with the Plaid package. Full replacement value is probably $95,000 to $105,000 depending on mileage and condition. Repair might be cheaper, $30,000 to $50,000 if the structural integrity hasn't been compromised. Her insurance company will push for her to get paid the full replacement value. Your insurance company will push back. You'll probably settle somewhere around $60,000 to $75,000. Marcus closed his eyes. That was almost the entire profit from his last development deal. That was 6 months of work completely erased. There's something else, Huang continued, and Marcus could hear him almost enjoying the delivery of bad news. Her letter says she's considering filing suit against both you and your homeowner's insurance. That suggests she's planning to claim additional damages beyond the vehicle itself. What kind of additional damages? Emotional distress, loss of use, potentially punitive damages if she can establish negligence. Marcus, the fact that you explicitly agreed to watch her vehicle and then failed to take reasonable precautions is going to be very expensive. After Huang hung up, Marcus sat in Karen's guest bedroom. He was still technically staying there and now didn't feel like the moment to leave, and felt the weight of the situation settle on him like a physical thing. He'd made a mistake, not a small one, a catastrophic, financially ruinous one, and the worst part was knowing that it had happened because he'd trusted someone, because Karen had been so certain, so confident, so persuasive that her Tesla was the solution to his problem. His phone buzzed, a text from his business partner, David. You coming in today? You're not answering emails. Marcus checked his email, 37 new messages. Most of them were from contractors and clients asking for updates on various projects. He'd missed a Zoom meeting at 9 a.m. He called David instead. I'm not coming in today, something came up, a property issue. You okay? David's tone shifted to concern. That's not like you. I'm fine, Marcus lied. Just some storm damage. I'll catch up with the contractors tomorrow. He hung up and sat in the quiet of the guest bedroom, listening to the occasional car pass outside. The neighbor's sprinkler system come on for its mid-morning cycle. The absolute ordinariness of the rest of the world continuing on while his world rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. By early afternoon, he'd received Karen's second letter. This one was more formal, a demand for compensation itemized with specific dates and figures. The Tesla repair, $47,000 their estimate, already higher than Huang's prediction. Loss of use, $2,000 per month for 3 months. Emotional distress and breach of trust, $15,000. Additional storage and transportation fees, $3,200. Grand total, $67,200. This is just the opening position, Huang said when Marcus called him back. She's probably expecting you to counteroffer. But Marcus, you need to understand something. She's setting up a narrative. She's being methodical. This suggests either she's got a very good lawyer or she's talked to a very good lawyer. What do I do? You let me handle it, Huang said. You don't respond to any more communications from her. You don't see her. You don't speak to her. You let me draft a response from me to her lawyer. And you prepare yourself for the fact that this is going to take months to resolve. That night, Marcus went to his own house for the first time since the disaster. The property looked devastated. The Tesla had been towed that morning. A flatbed truck had winched it out of its earthen grave, and Marcus had watched from Karen's porch as the white car, mud-streaked and destroyed, had been hauled away like a corpse. The tow truck operator had let out a low whistle. That's a nice car, he'd said. Hated to see it like that. Now Marcus stood at the edge of his pool and looked at the crack in the deck. It was worse than he'd thought. The structural engineer he'd called had left a preliminary report. The shift in ground saturation had stressed the deck in 3 locations. 1 crack was cosmetic. 2 were potentially structural. Repairs would require draining the pool, removing sections of the deck, realigning the base, and redoing the concrete and fiberglass work. Estimated cost, $35,000 to $50,000. So, the Tesla had cost him a minimum of $67,000. His pool repairs would cost another $50,000. The increased insurance premiums would probably add another $5,000 to his annual costs for the next 3 years. Total damage, approximately $172,000. Because Karen Rivera had suggested parking her Tesla by his pool for security purposes. Because he had agreed. Because he had failed to move it when it rained. Marcus sat on the undamaged portion of his pool deck and tried to remember why he'd ever wanted to help in the first place. Tuesday morning brought a surprise. Karen's sister had her baby, a girl 7 pounds 2 ounces named Sophia. Karen called Marcus with the news, her first direct communication since her lawyer had gotten involved. "She's healthy," Karen said, and there was genuine joy in her voice, the kind of emotion that temporarily overrode everything else. "The baby is healthy. My sister's going to be okay." Marcus felt something in his chest loosen slightly. "That's wonderful. I'm really happy for you." "I'm calling everyone," Karen said. "I wanted you to know." There was a pause. Marcus sensed an opening, a moment where the two of them existed outside of the legal framework they'd constructed. "Karen," he said carefully, "I'm sorry about your car, I really am. And I understand why you're upset, but I'd like to talk to you about resolving this without." "Not right now," Karen interrupted, but her tone was softer than it had been. "Right now, I just wanted to share good news. We can talk about the car later." After she hung up, Marcus found himself in an odd state of suspended relief. Maybe, he thought, this could still be resolved reasonably. Maybe once Karen got past the immediate crisis with her sister, she'd be more willing to work something out. Maybe her lawyer was just being aggressive, and she actually wanted to settle this without destroying his life. Maybe everything would be okay. He held on to that thought for approximately 3 days. Friday morning, Karen's lawyer sent a second letter, this one marked Final Demand. It was no longer a request for compensation. It was a statement. Unless Marcus agreed to pay the full amount of $67,200 within 5 business days, Karen was filing suit. The suit would include claims for property damage, emotional distress, breach of contract, and gross negligence. Karen was also, the letter informed him, requesting that Marcus's homeowner's insurance company be added as a defendant. Huang read it over the phone and let out a low whistle. "She's serious," he said. "This is no longer negotiation, this is litigation." "Can she really sue me for emotional distress?" Marcus asked. "She can file for it. Whether she wins is another question. But Marcus, here's what concerns me. She's probably gotten angry again. Something happened to reignite her anger, or someone, probably her lawyer, got in her ear about how much she can win if she goes to court." "What do I do?" "You authorize me to respond. We counter that, yes, you bear some responsibility for the vehicle's placement, but that a major weather event and ground instability are acts of God, not gross negligence. We offer a settlement of $25,000, which is more than fair given the circumstances." "She's not going to accept that." "No," Huang agreed. "But the process has started. If she wants to play hardball, we'll play hardball. But I need you to understand something, Marcus. This is going to get worse before it gets better. She's angry. You humiliated her, whether intentionally or not, by failing to keep her car safe. And now she's going to make sure you understand how that feels." Marcus continued to stay at Karen's house for 2 more weeks, though it now felt surreal. He was living in the home of someone who was actively suing him, eating from her dishware, sleeping in her guest bed, using her hot water. He considered moving to a hotel, but that felt like admitting defeat, like proving that the situation was truly as bad as Huang kept insisting it was. Work continued to demand his attention. The development deal was moving forward, foundation work had started, and there were a dozen decisions that only Marcus could make. He spent hours on video calls, trying to focus on square footage and zoning codes, while the lawsuit against him slowly built in the background like a second, parasitic project. He saw Karen twice. Once, he was coming out of the house to check his mail, and she was there in person, back from Phoenix, her face sun-darkened and exhausted, but carrying the glow of new grandmother joy. They exchanged the awkward nod of people who had once been friendly, but were now fundamentally opposed to each other. The second time, she was pulling out of her driveway as he was pulling in. She didn't wave. On the Friday of the 3rd week, Marcus's company held an all-hands meeting. His business partner, David, delivered the quarterly results. Profit was up 12%. They were expanding the development department, hiring 2 new people, probably opening a satellite office in Portland next year. It should have been good news. Instead, Marcus felt numb, because attached to the email announcing these developments was a separate message from David. "Can we talk after the meeting?" Something came up. They talked in David's office at 4 p.m. "Is everything okay with you?" David asked, and Marcus could see genuine concern on his face. "Because you've been weird for 3 weeks. You're not in the office, you're not responding to emails promptly, you're not engaged." "I'm fine," Marcus said automatically. "No, you're not," David said, with the bluntness of someone who'd been in business with you for 8 years. "You're clearly dealing with something, and I get it. You're entitled to have problems, but they're starting to affect the business. The Riverside project needs your input on the environmental assessment, and you've been ghosting the contractor." "I'm not ghosting him, I'm just—" "Whatever this is," David interrupted, "I need you to tell me if you're staying or leaving. Because if you're staying, you need to be here mentally and physically, and if you're leaving, I need to plan for that." The question hung in the air between them. Are you staying or leaving? A week ago, Marcus would have said staying without hesitation. Now, he wasn't sure. How could he stay when he was hemorrhaging money to a lawsuit? How could he focus on development deals when his personal finances were collapsing? "I'm staying," he heard himself say. "I'm sorry. There's a personal issue I'm dealing with, but it won't affect my work anymore. I'll be back in the office Monday morning." David looked skeptical, but he nodded. "Okay, good, because we need you. The business needs you." Marcus walked out of David's office and sat in his car in the company parking lot and felt something break inside him. That weekend, he finally left Corinne's house. He packed his suitcases, left the key on the counter with a note thanking her for letting him stay, and checked into a hotel near the airport. It was a Marriott, the kind of place he normally stayed at when traveling for business. It had a gym, a pool, room service that was available until 11 p.m. It had nothing to do with him, no history, no context. It was perfect for a man with nowhere else to go. On Monday morning, he went back to the office and threw himself into work with the intensity of someone trying to outrun his own life. The Riverside environmental assessment needed his signature. The Portland satellite office needed site selection. 3 new clients had come in requesting proposals. He took all of it on, working 14-hour days, responding to emails at midnight, taking calls while driving. By Tuesday, he'd almost convinced himself that he could work through this. That money was just money. That even if he lost the lawsuit, the business would survive. That Corinne's anger would eventually burn itself out. By Wednesday, his lawyer had received Corinne's formal filing. She was suing for $87,000, the increase accounting for legal fees and additional claims for loss of companionship with her vehicle. By Thursday, the news had apparently spread through the neighborhood. One of the HOA officers had called Marcus asking if there was a property dispute that might affect his standing as a member. Another neighbor, someone he barely knew, had texted him that she'd heard about the situation and was so sorry for all the drama. The private disaster was becoming public. By Friday, Marcus received an email from Corinne's lawyer containing a discovery request for a wide array of documents: insurance correspondence, communications with Corinne, photos of the property, weather records, communication with contractors, and more. Huang would file a response, but the message was clear. Corinne was preparing for battle. Settled his pool repair issues by having the damaged sections of deck replimed and resurfaced, $28,000. Hired a structural engineer to provide expert testimony about ground saturation and the impossible position of the Tesla, $4,500. Been deposed by Corinne's lawyers for 3 hours, during which they'd systematically tried to establish that he'd negligently agreed to park an expensive vehicle on unstable ground. Received a revised settlement offer from Corinne's team, $75,000 or go to trial. Huang had advised against settling. "She's betting you'll fold," he'd said. "And she might be right, but if you fold, you're giving her $75,000. If you go to trial and win, you give her nothing. If you go to trial and lose, you could give her $100,000 or more. So really the question is, how much do you believe in your position?" Marcus didn't believe in his position. He believed he'd made a terrible mistake. He believed that he was at fault, or at least partially at fault. He believed that Karen had been absolutely wrong to trust him with her vehicle, and he'd been absolutely wrong to agree. But Huang kept saying the same thing. The weather was unprecedented. You're not liable for acts of God. So Marcus didn't settle, he didn't fold, he prepared for trial. He finally saw Karen in person 2 months and 3 days after the storm, at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning. It was accidental. He'd gone to buy fresh vegetables, needing something real and alive after 2 months of hotel room service. She was there in the same row, looking at heirloom tomatoes. She looked different, thinner maybe. Her hair had more gray in it, or maybe she just stopped dyeing it. She wore less makeup. She looked, Marcus realized with a start, like a real person. Not the carefully constructed version of Karen he'd known, but the actual human underneath. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world continued around them, people browsing vegetables, music playing from someone's phone, the smell of fresh basil and earth. But between them, there was a pocket of stillness. Karen's face hardened. She turned away and moved to another vendor. Marcus stood there holding a basket of tomatoes he suddenly didn't want and felt the full weight of what had happened. Not the lawsuit, not the money, but this, the destruction of any possibility of goodwill between them. The transformation of a relationship based on neighborly cooperation into one based on resentment. He'd done that by agreeing to watch her car, by not moving it, by letting his negligence destroy her Tesla. Or she'd done it by asking him to park it there, by not explaining the risks, by pushing him toward an arrangement he'd been uncomfortable with from the start. Or they'd both done it together, in the complicated way that disasters usually happen, not through malice, but through the accumulation of small decisions and assumptions and misplaced trust. Neither of them wanted it to go that far, but neither of them seemed able to stop it. Karen's lawyer kept pushing for a higher settlement. Huang kept pushing back. The discovery process dragged on, becoming increasingly adversarial. They deposed each other. They argued about what constituted reasonable precaution. They hired engineers and meteorologists and specialists in ground saturation. It was going to cost them both a fortune. By late August, with 2 weeks until trial, Huang called Marcus with an unusual suggestion. "You should meet with her," he said. "Not as a legal strategy, just as human beings. Maybe you can figure out a resolution that doesn't require a judge to tell you what to do." "She doesn't want to see me," Marcus said. "Maybe not, but you could ask." So Marcus wrote Karen a letter, not through his lawyer, directly. He addressed it to her house, sealed it in an envelope, and left it on her porch on a Tuesday evening when he knew she'd be home. In it, he said, "Karen, I'm sorry I agreed to park your car there. I'm sorry I didn't move it when the storm hit. I'm sorry I failed to protect your property. I'm sorry that what started as me trying to help you has become this. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not writing this as a legal strategy. I'm writing it because I'm tired of being angry at you for putting me in a bad position while simultaneously being angry at myself for agreeing to be in that position. You were right to be upset. You trusted me and I let you down. The question now is whether we keep letting each other down or whether we try to find some way forward. I'm willing to meet with you, not with lawyers present, just the two of us figuring out what comes next. If you're willing, call me." Marcus. Karen called him the next morning at 7:03 a.m. "I'll meet with you," she said without preamble. "But I want you to understand something before you show up. This doesn't mean I'm not going to pursue the lawsuit. This doesn't mean I'm forgiving you. This just means I'm willing to talk." "I understand," Marcus said. "Sunday morning, 10 a.m., my house come alone." She hung up. Marcus found himself in a strange state of nervous anticipation. He'd been dreading this meeting, but now that it was happening, he realized he'd also been hopping for it. The lawsuit had been clean in its way, clear adversaries, clear rules, clear damages. But a face-to-face conversation was far scarier. In a face-to-face conversation, he might actually have to confront what he'd done, not just the legal and financial consequences, but the human cost. On Sunday morning, he drove to Karen's house at 9:55 a.m. She opened the door before he could knock. She must have been watching for him. She looked tired, she also looked angry. But underneath the anger, Marcus could see something else. Exhaustion. The exhaustion of fighting something that shouldn't require fighting. "Come in," she said. They sat at her dining room table, the same table where she'd convinced him to park his car by the pool. The morning light came through the windows, and Marcus could just see the edge of his property beyond hers. The pool gleamed innocently in the distance. "I want you to understand something," Corinne said, and her voice was steady but strained. "This wasn't about the money at first. Yes, the car was expensive. Yes, the repairs are costly, but that's not why I'm suing you." "Why are you suing me?" Marcus asked. "Because you made me feel stupid," Corinne said, and he heard the rawness in her voice. "I gave you my car, Marcus. I trusted you with it. And not just the car, I trusted you with my peace of mind. I left my sister during one of the most frightening weeks of her life because I thought my property was protected, and you failed to protect it." "I know," Marcus said. "You don't know," Corinne said sharply. "You don't know what it's like to realize that every decision you made was wrong, that your confidence in yourself was completely misplaced, that the person you thought was trustworthy was actually reckless." Marcus found himself thinking about the farmer's market, about the moment when Corinne had turned away from him, when he'd realized the bridge between them was burned. "I made a terrible mistake," he said quietly. "I should have moved your car the moment the weather started deteriorating. I should have told you no when you asked me to park it there. I should have." "You should have been the person you appeared to be," Corinne said bitterly. "You should have been competent and careful and responsible. You should have been the man I thought I was dealing with." "I was," Marcus said, and he heard the defensiveness in his own voice. I made one mistake and it was catastrophic, but I'm not a failure. I'm not incompetent." "Aren't you?" Corinne asked, and there was a challenge in her voice. "You parked a Tesla on the edge of a pool during storm season. You didn't check the ground stability. You didn't move the vehicle when weather conditions changed. You didn't think about anything except that my security system would somehow make up for your negligence. The weather was unprecedented." "Don't," Corinne cut him off. "Don't blame the weather. I'm not blaming you because of the weather. I'm blaming you because you had the power to prevent this and you didn't. You could have moved the car inside your garage. You could have parked it in her driveway instead of next to your pool. You could have done literally dozens of things differently, and you did nothing." They sat in silence. Marcus felt the weight of her words, the accuracy of them. "You're right," he said finally. "You're completely right. I made a terrible decision, and I failed to correct it, and it cost you $47,000 and months of grief and a lawsuit that's going to cost us both a fortune in legal fees. I don't have an excuse." "No, you don't," Corinne agreed. "So here's what we're going to do. You're going to settle my lawsuit for $60,000, not $75,000, not $87,000, $60,000. That's what the Tesla repairs will actually cost once the insurance adjusters are finished, and that's what you're going to pay me." "My insurance?" "I don't care about your insurance," Corinne said. "You agreed to watch my car, you failed, you pay for it." Marcus felt the weight of the number. $60,000, not as bad as $87,000, but it was money he didn't have liquid. He'd have to borrow it or liquidate investments. It would hurt. "And then what?" he asked. "And then we go back to being neighbors," Corinne said, and there was something almost sad in her voice. "Not friends, neighbors. We wave at each other in the driveway. We don't talk about the Tesla or the lawsuit or any of this. We just exist on the same street without actively hating each other." "I don't hate you," Marcus said. "I know," Corinne said quietly. "That's the problem. If you hated me, this would be easier. But you don't, and neither do I. You just failed me when it mattered, and I have to live with the fact that my instinct to trust you was wrong." Marcus stood and walked to the window. From Corinne's dining room, he could see his pool, undamaged except for the repaired deck. The water was perfect again, chlorinated and pristine. All the evidence of the disaster had been cleaned up. The settlement agreement was finalized on September 3, a week before the trial was scheduled to begin. Marcus signed the papers at his lawyer's office while Corinne signed hers, and somewhere in the filing process, the lawsuit ceased to exist. It was replaced by something worse, reality. Marcus had to write a check for $60,000. His accountant helped him liquidate $45,000 from his investment portfolio, which triggered capital gains taxes, adding another $8,000 to the cost. He borrowed the remaining $15,000 from a line of credit at 8.5% interest. Combined with the pool repairs, the increased insurance premiums, and the legal fees he'd already paid, the total cost of his mistake was somewhere in the neighborhood of $120,000. It was, quite literally, the most expensive mistake of his life. But money was the easy part. The hard part was living in a neighborhood where Karen Rivera existed. He started seeing her everywhere, at the grocery store, at the gas station. Jogging past his house in the morning, every sighting was a small murder, a reminder of what he'd destroyed. And every time, Karen would simply nod or not acknowledge him at all and move on with her life. She moved on with her life quite well, actually. By October, Marcus heard through the HOA grapevine that Karen had sold her house. Relocating to San Diego, someone said at an HOA meeting. Close to family, her sister just moved down there with the new baby. When Marcus heard this, he felt a complicated mixture of relief and regret. Relief that he wouldn't have to see her constantly. Regret that the neighborhood was losing her and that he was the reason she felt the need to leave. The house sold for $1.2 million, which Karen probably made about $100,000 on in commission, since she'd understandably listed it herself. So at least the lawsuit hadn't bankrupted her. At least her life went on, expanded into new geography, new opportunities, new neighbors who hadn't destroyed her $90,000 car through negligence. Marcus helped himself not think about that. October brought cold air and the end of summer in California, not the end of heat, but the end of the specific blazing intensity of late August and early September. The trees changed color tentatively, as if they weren't quite sure this was autumn or just a temporary phenomenon. His pool stayed at 73 degrees, perfect, never needing his attention or worry. Work demanded his focus, and he let it. The development deal that had consumed his summer came to fruition. The new commercial space opened in early October, attracting 3 anchor tenants and becoming exactly the kind of success that made Marcus remember why he loved his job. He hired the 2 new developers they'd been planning to bring on. He began preliminary work on 2 new projects. David noticed the change. "You seem better," he said, catching Marcus in his office one morning. "Like you're back." "I'm back," Marcus confirmed, and it was mostly true. The physical part of him was present. Whether the mental part had fully returned was a more complicated question. By late October, Karen's house was completely empty. Moving trucks had come and gone. The new owners, a family with 2 kids, according to HOA gossip, were moving in the first week of November. Marcus made a point of not being home on moving day. When he finally drove past the house, after the new family had settled, he saw children's toys in the front yard, a basketball hoop being installed on the driveway, evidence of life resuming. The house looked happy again. It looked like a place where people lived, rather than a place where a woman had sat alone in an immaculate, impersonal home, waiting for her sister's baby to arrive, waiting for her Tesla to be destroyed, waiting for the rug to be pulled out from under her sense of control and safety. Marcus drove on. November brought the first serious rain of the season. It wasn't a storm like the one in June. Just rain, steady, insistent, the kind that California had been waiting for since May. The reservoirs needed it. The aquifer needed it. The earth needed it. And the first time Marcus saw rain, he felt a jolt of anxiety that was entirely disproportionate to the weather. He checked his pool. The deck was holding. The drainage system was working. There was no Tesla anywhere near the water, vulnerable and heavy and waiting to sink. He checked his weather apps and felt absurd for doing so. The rain was normal. Forecast was normal. The ground would saturate, yes, but within normal parameters. Nothing was going to be destroyed. But he couldn't quite believe that until the rain stopped and everything remained intact. David asked him, in mid-November, if he wanted to partner on a new development. It was a big opportunity, a mixed-use space in downtown Portland, exactly the kind of project Marcus loved. Retail on the ground floor, office space above, premium finishes, sustainable design. It required raising capital, finding investors, coordinating with city planning. It was going to take 18 months of intense work and collaboration. "I'd be leading the development," David explained over coffee. "But I need someone I trust to handle the financial side, the city coordination, the legal requirements. I need you." Marcus thought about the lawsuit, about the $60,000 he'd paid Karen, about the way a single decision had consumed 6 months of his life and cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars. "I'm in," he said. And he meant it. December was quiet. Holiday parties that Marcus attended without much enthusiasm. Christmas presents he bought without much thought. A week off in the middle of the month where he did nothing except walk his neighborhood, check on his property, and try to remember what contentment felt like. It was during one of these walks that he ran into his neighbor, Tom Hendricks, the one whose foundation Karen had feared was being damaged by pool drainage. Tom was coming out of his house, carrying a bag of trash to the bin. "Hey, Marcus," Tom called out. "Haven't seen you around much." "Been working a lot," Marcus said. "Yeah, I heard about your situation with Karen," Tom said, and Marcus felt his stomach tight. "That was rough, lawsuit and everything." "It's resolved," Marcus said, trying to move the conversation along. "Yeah, but still rough," Tom said, not picking up on Marcus's cues. "You know, I actually feel kind of bad about the whole pool drainage thing. We were being pretty aggressive about it." Marcus blinked. "You were?" "Oh yeah, totally," Tom said, not making eye contact, suddenly very interested in his trash bin. "My lawyer said we had a case, but honestly, I wasn't sure. And then with everything that happened with your pool after the storm, all the cracks and repairs. I don't know. It seemed petty to push forward with litigation when you were clearly dealing with your own stuff." "You're not suing?" Marcus asked slowly. "Nah, we're good," Tom said, finally looking at him. "Actually, you did a great job with the drainage. We had a structural engineer come out just to check things, and he said your system was state-of-the-art. No water damage on our end. My wife convinced me we were being paranoid. So yeah, no lawsuit, all good." Marcus felt something in his chest release, a tension he hadn't even known he was carrying. "Thank you," he said, and meant it profoundly. "No problem," Tom said. "And hey, I'm sorry about the car situation. That sounds like a nightmare." "It was," Marcus admitted, "but it's over now." The last week of December, Marcus received an unexpected package. It arrived on his porch on December 27, no return address, his name written in handwriting he recognized. Inside was a Christmas ornament, a beautiful thing, hand-blown glass depicting a pool in blue and white, and a note on Karen's stationery that said, "Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. I wanted you to know I'm no longer angry, I'm just sad, but I'm also okay. My sister is okay, Sophia is beautiful, life is going on. I hope you can move forward too. Karen." Marcus hung the ornament on his tree and stared at it for a long time, feeling the weight of those words. She's no longer angry, just sad. He found her new address through the MLS system and sent her a card. Nothing elaborate, just a note saying that he was glad her sister and niece were healthy and that he hoped San Diego was treating her well. He didn't apologize again. The apologies had been made. She never responded. January came, and with it, the winter of Marcus's discontent. It wasn't depression, exactly. It was more like a baseline sadness, a low-level awareness that he destroyed something that couldn't be repaired. The neighborhood had lost Karen Rivera, and he was responsible for that loss. Not because she'd left for good reasons, for her family, for her sister. But the urgency of that leaving had been born from a sense of needing to escape, and Marcus was the reason she needed to escape. The pool remained perfect. The deck repairs had held. The Tesla was gone, sitting in some insurance lot in San Diego, or was being rebuilt or had become scrap metal. The lawsuit was resolved. The summer was long past. But something had shifted in Marcus's understanding of himself. He'd always thought of himself as responsible, competent, careful, the kind of man you could trust, and he was those things. But he was also capable of catastrophic error in judgment. He was capable of agreeing to something he shouldn't agree to. He was capable of failing to take reasonable precautions. He was capable of destroying someone else's life through negligence. Those insights would sit with him, he realized, not as guilt exactly, but as humility. He would carry the memory of Karen's face when the Tesla sank. He would remember the moment at the farmer's market when she'd turned away from him. He would understand for the rest of his life that trust was fragile and decisions had consequences, and a single summer afternoon could cascade into months of litigation and destroyed relationships. The new owners of Karen's house, the family with the 2 kids, had fully settled in by February. Marcus sometimes saw them. A husband and wife, 2 children, maybe 8 and 10, a golden retriever that they'd apparently recently adopted. They looked happy. They looked like the kind of family that belonged in a neighborhood that would send down roots that wouldn't be destroyed by a single act of negligence. In early February, they invited the neighborhood to a small gathering. A welcome to the neighborhood thing that was really just an excuse for people to drop by with wine and casseroles. and assess whether the new neighbors were suitable community members. Marcus was putting off attending. He had no desire to make small talk with people in Corinne's house, to pretend to be friendly, to smile and nod while people lived the life that Corinne had built there. But David had other ideas. "You should go," David said when Marcus mentioned the gathering over lunch. "It's 2 hours, you'll survive." "I don't want to." "I know, that's precisely why you should go." David pointed his fork at Marcus for emphasis. "You're still carrying this thing, the lawsuit, Corinne leaving, all of it, and you're not going to move forward unless you actually move forward." "I'm moving forward," Marcus protested. "I'm working. I'm engaged with the Portland project." "You're functioning," David said. "That's not the same thing. You're like someone whose leg was broken but hasn't quite regained the ability to walk normally. You can do it, but you're still limping." Marcus hated that David was right. He also hated that David was pushing him, forcing him to confront the thing he'd been trying not to confront. That as long as he avoided Corinne's house, avoided the neighborhood, avoided acknowledging that life had simply continued without him, he was stuck. The gathering was on a Saturday evening in early February. Marcus showed up at 7 p.m. with a bottle of wine he didn't think much of, dressed in neutral clothing that suggested he neither cared nor didn't care about making an impression. The house looked different now. The immaculate show-home aesthetic that Corinne had maintained had been replaced by something warmer, more lived in. The walls that had been bare were now covered with family photos. The furniture that had been carefully arranged for function was now covered with the comfortable disorder of actual occupation. Children's art projects were pinned to the refrigerator. Books were scattered on surfaces. It looked like home. The family's names were Rebecca and Tom, not Henderson, Marcus's litigious neighbor, but a different Tom entirely. Their kids were Sophie and James. The golden retriever was named Honey and had recently come from a rescue organization. "We love this neighborhood," Rebecca was saying to someone as Marcus entered. The previous owner clearly had excellent taste, even if she did leave some interesting infrastructure decisions. She was gesturing toward the backyard, which Marcus could see through the open French doors. And what she was gesturing toward was Corinne's old driveway, the spot where the Tesla had sat, where it had been parked to guard his pool, where the sinking incident had begun. "She parked her car there?" James, the younger child, asked with the innocent curiosity of children. "For security, apparently," Tom said, and Marcus could hear the slight skepticism in his voice. "Pretty car, but kind of an odd choice for a parking spot. We're going to put in a garden, make better use of the space." Marcus felt something catch in his throat. Corinne's Tesla wasn't going to be immortalized as a disaster spot. It was going to be replaced by flowers, by vegetables, by the natural cycle of a space being reclaimed from one use and transformed into another. He found himself standing at the French doors, looking at the place where the car had been, trying to reconcile the memory of that disaster with the ordinariness of this moment. A family discussing their landscaping plans, a dog sniffing around the yard, children running around, life simply continuing. "You're Marcus, right?" He turned to find Rebecca addressing him, a wine glass in her hand, her expression curious and friendly. "I am," Marcus said. "The previous owner mentioned you," Rebecca said. "Corinne, she stopped by a few days before closing to check on some details. She mentioned the pool situation, the lawsuit." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. She did. "She wanted to make sure we understood the HOA guidelines about the pool, about water runoff, about drainage," Rebecca said. "She was very thorough, very concerned that we not repeat her mistakes, I think is how she phrased it." "What did she say about the drainage?" Marcus asked carefully. "That it was extremely important to maintain the proper systems," Rebecca said. "That she'd learned the hard way how water damage disputes could become legal situations. She was very clear about the fact that your system was excellent and that we shouldn't have any problems if we maintained it properly." Rebecca smiled, and it was warm and uncomplicated. "She seemed like a nice woman," Rebecca added. "A little stressed maybe, but nice." Marcus left the party at 8:30, claiming an early morning meeting, though he had no early morning meeting. He drove home and sat on the edge of his pool, looking at the water, thinking about Corinne standing in her own house. No, his neighbor's house now, but her house for 3 years, and warning them about water damage and drainage disputes. She'd been teaching her replacement how not to make her mistakes. He thought about that, turning it over in his mind the way a person turns over a stone, trying to see what's underneath. Karen had moved to San Diego. She'd gotten the Tesla fixed or written it off. Insurance would have sorted it out. She'd gone back to her real estate work. Her sister's baby was healthy. Her life had continued, had expanded, had probably gotten better in some measurable way. But before she left, she'd made sure to warn the new people about water damage, about proper drainage maintenance, about the liability of pools in desert climates. She'd been protecting his neighborhood from the mistakes he'd made. He called his lawyer on Monday morning. "I want to revisit the settlement," Marcus said without preamble. Huang sounded confused. "You agreed to $60,000. She agreed to $60,000. The settlement is closed." "I want to send her more money," Marcus said. "I want to send her another $20,000. There was a long pause. "Why would you do that?" Huang asked finally. "You legally paid your obligation. You're not liable for anything beyond that." "I know," Marcus said, "but legally obligated and morally obligated aren't the same thing." Another pause. Marcus could practically hear Huang recalculating, trying to figure out if Marcus was having some kind of mental health crisis. "Marcus, are you okay?" Huang asked finally. "No," Marcus said, "but I want to send Karen Rivera an additional $20,000 as a gesture of, I don't know, closure, acknowledgement, something." "That's not legally possible," Huang said carefully. "The settlement was final. If you try to send her money without it being part of a legal agreement, it could raise questions about the sufficiency of the original settlement. It could create legal complications." "Then let's make it part of a legal agreement," Marcus said. Huang made a low sound of exasperation. Why? You won this, you paid a fair amount and you moved on. Why are you undoing that?" "Because I wasn't fair," Marcus said. "Karen wasn't trying to trick me or get rich off me. She trusted me with her car and I failed her. And then I spent 6 months being angry at her for being angry at me. And now I'm sitting here knowing that she's in a new city and she's rebuilt her life, but part of that was because she had to escape the reminder of what happened. And before she left, she warned the new neighbors about water damage and proper drainage, because she didn't want anyone else to get hurt." "That's generous of her," Huang said slowly. "That's her being decent," Marcus said, "and I want to be decent too." There was another long pause. "I'll see what I can do," Huang said finally. "But Marcus, understand this, you can't undo what happened. You can't buy absolution. Money is just money." "I know," Marcus said, "but I want to try anyway." The additional settlement took 3 weeks to arrange. Karen's lawyer in San Diego had to be involved. New paperwork had to be drawn up. An addendum to the existing settlement had to be agreed to, signed, and notarized. When it was finally done, when Karen had agreed to accept the additional $20,000, her lawyer had initially pushed back, uncertain about what Marcus's angle was. Marcus sent a check and a note. "Karen, this isn't an attempt to buy forgiveness. I know you're not angry anymore, and I know you've moved on with your life, which is wonderful. This money is for something I should have done from the beginning, actually taking responsibility for my negligence, not just the legal minimum of responsibility, but the full responsibility. You were right to be angry. I failed you, and I want you to know that I understand that now, fully and completely. I hope you're happy in San Diego. I hope Sophia is growing beautifully. I hope you're at peace." Marcus. Karen didn't call, she didn't write a card. She simply deposited the check. But a month later, when Marcus ran a check on his property to see if anything else needed maintenance, he found an email in his spam folder. It was from Karen, dated just 3 days after she'd received the check. The email was short. "Thank you, not for the money, but for understanding. That meant more than you know. I've started a new real estate business in San Diego, focusing on helping women who are starting over. I call it Second Chances Properties. I think that's fitting. Karen." Marcus read it 20 times, and each time he felt something in him settle. Not absolution. He didn't believe in absolution, but resolution, understanding. The acknowledgement that 2 people had collided, had damaged each other, and were now choosing to move forward. Spring arrived, as it always does, and Marcus found himself in a different relationship with his neighborhood, his property, and the sequence of events that had defined his winter. The new family, Rebecca, Tom, Sophie, James, and Honey, had started their garden project in the space where Corinne's Tesla had sat. They'd brought in a landscape designer, created raised beds, planted a mix of vegetables and herbs. By March, the first shoots were coming up. By April, there was actual food growing where there had once been a $90,000 car sinking into contaminated mud. Life transforms spaces, Marcus thought, watching the garden take shape. It fills in the gaps where disaster used to be. The Portland project was moving forward at a rapid pace. Marcus and David had successfully raised $8.7 million from investors, had finalized the architecture plans, and had begun preliminary construction work. Marcus was at the site at least 3 days a week, coordinating with contractors, reviewing systems, making the thousands small decisions that kept a development moving forward. He was good at this work. He was focused, detail-oriented, careful in ways that the Corinne situation had taught him to be. He didn't make assumptions. He checked conditions before committing to decisions. He thought about consequences. It was, he realized, who he'd always been, but the Tesla incident had crystallized it. Had shown him both his competence and his capacity for failure, and had made him determined not to fail again. In late April, Marcus ran into David's ex-wife at a coffee shop. Sarah had been married to David for 7 years, had divorced him 3 years ago, and worked as a marketing executive for a tech company. She and Marcus had always liked each other. They had that careful cordiality that divorced people's friend groups cultivate, a kind of diplomatic neutrality that acknowledged the relationship was over but had nothing to do with them. "Marcus, I haven't seen you in forever," Sarah said, buying her usual lavender latte. "How's the development world treating you?" They caught up for the obligatory 5 minutes. Then Sarah asked, "Are you still with that woman? What was her name? Corinne? I thought you two were getting pretty serious." Marcus blinked. "Corinne, no, that was never. We were neighbors. It's been complicated." "Oh," Sarah said, looking confused. "David mentioned something about you having a situation. I guess I misunderstood." After she left, Marcus sat with his coffee and felt the strangeness of being misremembered. Corinne wasn't his girlfriend. She never had been. But to the outside world, to people like Sarah who only half paid attention to gossip, the story had probably transformed into something more romantic, more comprehensible. Beautiful neighbor, attractive businessman, something had happened between them. The reality was much simpler and much worse. He'd made a terrible decision, it had cost her money and peace of mind, and then he'd paid her off and she'd left town. There was no romance in that. There was only negligence and consequence. By May, it was warm again. The pool called to Marcus differently now. He swam in it most mornings before work, a ritual he'd never had before the Tesla incident. The cold water shocked his system, woke him up, reminded him that his body still worked, that he was still alive, that catastrophe was behind him. One morning in mid-May, he ran into Rebecca and her kids at the edge of the pool. They were cleaning out the filter, and James had gotten soaked. "Sorry," Rebecca said, wringing out James's shirt. "We were trying to help Marcus maintain the pool systems. I guess we're not quite there yet." "I can show him," Marcus offered, and found himself spending 45 minutes teaching James how to check the chlorine levels, clean the filter, monitor the pH balance. James asked good questions. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding the mechanics of keeping a pool functional. "There's so much to it," James said, looking impressed and slightly overwhelmed. "How do you remember all this?" "You learn through experience," Marcus said, "and through making mistakes." He thought about telling James about the Tesla, about Corinne, about the storm and the lawsuit and the 6 months of chaos that had stemmed from a single bad decision. He thought about explaining that sometimes learning meant the hard way, through failures and consequences. But James was 8, and the lesson was too complex for that age. Instead, he said, "Just pay attention. Check your systems regularly. Take care of things before they become problems." It was the lesson he'd learned. It was probably the only lesson worth teaching. In June, exactly 1 year after the storm, Marcus received an unexpected package. It came from San Diego. No return address, but he recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a photograph. It showed Corinne and an older woman, presumably her sister, and a beautiful 1-year-old girl, Sophia, all smiling in front of a beach. Sophia was clearly thriving, healthy and happy, with her mother's dark eyes and her grandmother's smile. On the back of the photo, Corinne had written, "1 year later, life goes on." Second Chances Properties just won Best New Business in San Diego County. Never thought I'd say this, but the Tesla accident was the best thing that ever happened to me professionally. It forced me to stop being a solo operator, to think about helping other people navigate difficult transitions. I don't forgive you, Marcus. I don't think about you much at all anymore. But I wanted you to know that I'm okay. More than okay, I'm thriving. I hope you are too. Karen. Marcus put the photograph on his nightstand and let himself really see it. Karen happy, her sister happy, Sophia healthy and alive and loved. The image was small, and it represented an enormous amount of distance. Geographic, temporal, emotional. He thought about what he'd cost her. Not just money, but time, peace of mind, the simple knowledge that she could trust someone. And then he thought about what she'd done with that cost. She'd transformed it into a business that helped women starting over. She'd taken her experience of failure and used it to build something that gave other people second chances. That was grace, Marcus realized. Not forgiving him, but taking what he'd done and transforming it into something generative rather than destructive. By summer, Marcus had stopped swimming in the pool as much. He'd purchased a gym membership and was using that instead. The chlorine smell was different in an indoor pool, the water colder, the environment completely divorced from the context of his house and his disaster and his winter of consequences. He was dating again. A woman named Sarah, different Sarah, not David's ex. She worked in architecture, had a daughter from a previous relationship, was kind in ways that suggested she'd been through her own difficulties and had come out the other side understanding empathy. He didn't mention Karen or the Tesla to Sarah. That seemed like ancient history, a story from another lifetime. The person he'd been when he agreed to Karen's proposition was someone he could barely recognize, more trusting, more naive, less careful about consequences. He'd evolved in the way that people do when they've been taught difficult lessons. He'd become more cautious, more deliberate, more aware of his own capacity for error. He'd become, in other words, someone who could probably handle a Tesla parked by a pool without destroying it. But he would never be asked to try. In September, David and Marcus attended a development conference in Portland, which was convenient since they were working on a project there. On the second evening, they went to dinner with the architectural firm they were using, and Marcus found himself sitting across from a woman named Linda who ran the sustainable design division. Linda was talking about water systems, about pool design in drought-prone areas, about the ethics of maintaining luxury amenities when water is increasingly precious. Really, pools are becoming indefensible in California, Linda was saying. They're a status symbol, sure, but they're also a massive water waste. I've been pushing clients toward river rock features and xeriscaping instead. Some people really love pools, one of the architects said diplomatically. I know, Linda said, but maybe they shouldn't. Maybe we should be designing communities without the expectation that every home needs 9,000 gallons of chlorinated water. Marcus listened to this conversation and thought about his pool. 9,000 gallons. It had been full when the storm hit. It had been full when the Tesla sank. It was full now, sitting in his backyard, perfect and unused and incredibly wasteful. He thought about draining it, paving over it, converting it into something more sensible in an era of climate change and water scarcity. He thought about it, and then he thought about Karen, who had trusted him to protect her car from disaster, and the way that disaster had taught him that things he took for granted could disappear. He thought about how the pool had been beautiful before the storm, and how it had been beautiful after, and how it would probably continue to be beautiful until it was gone. Life was temporary, possessions were temporary, relationships were fragile and could be destroyed by negligence. But beauty persisted, and growth, and the possibility of second chances. The pool never got drained. Marcus kept it maintained, kept it clean, kept the chemicals balanced according to the specifications that James had helped him review. Occasionally, he would float in it on a raft in the morning before work, looking up at the sky, thinking about the chain of events that had led him to this moment. The Tesla had sunk into the mud. Karen had moved to San Diego. The lawsuit had been settled and then unsettled with additional payment. Rebecca's family was thriving in Karen's old house. His own business was growing. Sarah spent 2 nights a week at his place, and the 5 nights she wasn't there, he slept deeper than he had in years. He had been broken and had repaired himself. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to function, enough to move forward, enough to understand that some things are lost and some are salvaged, and most things are somewhere in between. 1 year and a half after the storm, Marcus saw Corinne. Not in person, but on a local San Diego news broadcast that he was watching while Sarah made breakfast. The segment was about women business owners, and there she was, Corinne Rivera, founder of Second Chances Properties, talking about her vision for helping women navigate career transitions and fresh starts. She looked different. Her hair was shorter. She'd gained weight, which looked good on her. She seemed healthier, less constructed, more real. She was wearing no makeup except lipstick, and she was laughing at something the interviewer had said. After my own difficult transition, Corinne was telling the reporter, I realized that so many women are going through similar things and struggling alone. I wanted to create a business that acknowledged that starting over isn't a failure. It's just a different path. Sarah came over with toast and saw Corinne on the screen. She looks nice, Sarah said. Is that someone you know? A neighbor, Marcus said, from a while ago before you. Well, she seems successful, Sarah said, kissing the top of his head. After Sarah went to work, Marcus stayed in bed and watched the clip again, listening to Corinne talk about second chances and new paths and the possibility of growth emerging from failure. She'd done it. She'd taken her pain and her displacement and her loss, and she'd turned it into something that served other people. She'd built something beautiful out of something that had destroyed them both, however temporarily. Not because of what Linda had said about water waste, though that mattered. Not because he didn't use it anymore, though that was true. He was going to drain it because of what Corinne had taught him. He'd spent 2 years maintaining a symbol of his mistake. Every time he looked at it, he remembered the Tesla. Every time he cleaned it, he thought about the storm. Every time he floated in it, he was floating in the literal place where disaster had occurred. It was time to let it go. He didn't announce it to anyone, didn't make a big deal about it. He simply called a pool contractor and requested that the pool be drained, the structure demolished, the foundation filled in and resurfaced. It took 3 weeks. The pool was emptied into the municipal water system. The structure was broken up by jackhammers. The debris was hauled away. The earth was prepared for what would come next. When it was finally done, Marcus's property looked fundamentally different. The size felt larger without the mass of water. The space opened up in ways he hadn't anticipated. It was like losing a tooth and suddenly becoming aware of the shape of your mouth. He planted the space with native plants, California oaks and sage and wildflowers that thrived in drought conditions. The landscape architect he hired was enthusiastic about the project, treating the converted pool space as an opportunity rather than a loss. This is actually beautiful, the architect said, showing Marcus the design. Creates a natural habitat instead of a resource drain, transforms the whole feeling of the space. When it was finished, Marcus's backyard had become wild in a controlled way. The plants were still young, still establishing themselves, but they had potential for growth, for transformation, for becoming something other than what had been. Sarah loved it. She spent time in the space, planting additional flowers, watering the young trees, watching birds come to drink from the bird bath they'd installed. The first time David visited after the transformation, he walked around the space and said, Jesus, Marcus, that's bold. You just destroyed a 9,000-gallon status symbol. The status symbol was actually a disaster, Marcus said. I'm just making it official. David laughed, but Marcus could see him registering the decision, understanding what it meant. Marcus wasn't just moving on from the Tesla incident. He was actively dismantling the monument to his own negligence. 2 months after the pool was destroyed, Marcus received a final package from Corinne. There was no photograph this time, just a card, beautiful and expensive-looking, with a message in her careful handwriting. My business partner showed me a video of my recent interview. At the end, he told me that I should reach out to you. That holding on to resentment, even dormant resentment, takes energy. I've let it go, Marcus. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I needed to move on completely, not just geographically. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, yes, I still follow the community Facebook page, that you drained your pool, that you're planting native trees, that you're dating someone and seem happy. I hope all of that is true. I hope you learned what you needed to learn. I hope you'll be more careful with people's trust going forward. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just glad we're both okay. Second chances for everyone. Karen. Marcus read the card 3 times, then placed it on his desk next to the photograph of Karen and her sister and Sophia. He left it there as a reminder, as a monument to the lessons he'd learned, as evidence that it was possible for two people to destroy each other and then, given enough distance and time, to find peace. The pool was gone. The Tesla was gone. Karen was in San Diego building a business that helped other women start over. Marcus was in California running a development company, dating someone kind, learning slowly and painfully that trust was worth the risk, as long as you were careful and aware and not negligent. The Tesla incident had cost him $120,000 and changed his life fundamentally. It had cost Karen peace of mind and forced her to relocate. It had created months of legal warfare and emotional devastation. But it had also taught them both something essential: that people were fragile, that consequences were real, and that the only way to truly move forward was to acknowledge what had happened, learn from it, and then actively choose something different. Marcus looked out at his new garden, at the young oak trees reaching toward the sky, at the space where his pool had been. It was starting to become beautiful. Not in the calculated, constructed way that pools were beautiful, but in the wild, unplanned way that nature was beautiful when given space to grow. He sent Karen a message on the real estate website they'd both used during their transaction. Just one line. "Thank you for the grace. I'm learning to do the same." She never replied, but the card stayed on his desk, a reminder that second chances were possible, if you were willing to be honest about what had been lost, and then brave enough to plant something new in its place. Marcus read it in the business section of the San Diego Union Tribune while sitting in a Starbucks in downtown Portland, waiting for David to arrive for a meeting. The article detailed how Karen Rivera had expanded her business from a single office in San Diego to 20 offices across California. She'd won multiple awards for her work helping women in transition: divorced women, widowed women, women leaving careers or relationships or old lives and looking for something new. There was a photo of Karen accepting an award, her hair now completely gray, which she wore with the confidence of someone who'd stopped pretending to be anything other than exactly who she was. There was a quote: "When I started Second Chances, it was because I myself had to start over, twice. And I learned that starting over isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of. Every person deserves a second chance. Every person deserves the possibility of growth." Marcus bookmarked the article and emailed it to David with the message: "That's the woman who sued me 5 years ago. Looks like she won." David's response came back immediately: "Best possible outcome. She built something real." That night, Marcus called Sarah, and they took a walk through the neighborhood where they'd been living for the past 3 years. It was a nice neighborhood, tree-lined and quiet, the kind of place where people put down roots and stayed. "Remember the Tesla story?" he asked Sarah as they walked. "Vaguely," Sarah said. "The thing with the pool and your neighbor." "She's been very successful," Marcus said. "She built a whole business out of what happened. Out of the failure, she created something that helps people." "That's good," Sarah said. "That's what you're supposed to do with hard things, right? You're supposed to transform them into something meaningful." Marcus thought about his transformed backyard, about the native plants that were thriving, about the space where his pool had been. He thought about how he'd learned to be more careful, more aware, more honest about his own capacity for error. He thought about Karen in San Diego, helping women start over, giving them second chances, building something that would probably outlast both of them. And he realized that the Tesla had sunk for a reason. Not a cosmic reason, not a fate reason, but a human reason. It had forced both of them to grow, to change, to become people who could accept responsibility and move forward and help others do the same. That was the grace of the Tesla. That was the lesson of the pool. It was for Second Chances Properties, now a nonprofit foundation that helped women in transition find housing, secure funding, and build new lives. The gala was held at a beautiful beachfront venue, and there were hundreds of women present, some who had been helped by the organization, some who were donors, some who were just there to celebrate the impact of what Karen had built. Marcus came as a donor. He'd been contributing quietly to the foundation for years, ever since he'd learned what Karen was doing. He'd never mentioned his contribution, and as far as he knew, Karen didn't know about it. But midway through the evening, while the speeches were happening, Marcus found himself standing near the edge of the space, looking out at the ocean, and he felt a presence beside him. It was Corinne. She was older now, they both were. Her hair was white, completely white, worn long and elegant. She was wearing a beautiful dress, and she carried herself with the ease of someone who'd built something and knew it was good. "Hello, Marcus," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it. He turned, surprised. "Corinne, hello." They stood there for a moment, not quite sure how to navigate this reunion. 20 years was a long time. Lawsuits were a long time ago. Memories were complicated. "I know about your donations," Corinne said finally. "I've known for years. One of my board members recognized your name and ran the donations through our database." Marcus felt his face warm. "I wasn't trying to hide it. I just thought it was better to do it quietly." "Thank you," Corinne said simply. "For the money, but more for understanding why this work matters. You learned that lesson early and expensively." "You learned it and then you did something with it," Marcus said. "You actually helped people. I just tried to assuage my guilt with money." "That's not true," Corinne said gently. "Assuaging guilt is easy. What you did was harder. You acknowledged what you'd done, you paid what you owed, you transformed yourself into someone more careful and more aware. And then you supported the work. That's not guilt, that's integrity." They watched the ocean for a moment. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, the kind of California beauty that Corinne had presumably been enjoying for the past 2 decades. "I never hated you," Corinne said finally. "I want you to know that. I was angry, yes, hurt, yes, but hate requires an ongoing commitment, and I couldn't sustain that. It was exhausting, so I let it go, and in letting it go, I built this." "I'm sorry for what I did," Marcus said, and he meant it with a depth that 20 years hadn't diminished. "I know," Corinne said, "and I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to move on. We both deserve to move on." She smiled, that same smile that had convinced him to park the Tesla by the pool, but transformed now, deepened by experience and time and the work of building something meaningful. "Your backyard," Corinne said. "David told me you planted native trees. Is that true?" "It is," Marcus said. "I drained the pool, built a garden instead." "That's beautiful," Corinne said. "That's exactly right." They talked for another 20 minutes, standing by the ocean, watching the sunset, catching up on decades of life. Corinne talked about her children. She'd remarried, had 2 more kids after Sophia, was now a grandmother herself. Marcus talked about Sarah, about his business, about his evolution as a human being. And when it was time for Corinne to return to her event, to give her speech about second chances and resilience, she squeezed his hand and said, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting this work. Thank you for being someone who can learn and change." Marcus watched her walk away, returning to the podium, preparing to speak to the women who'd been transformed by the business she'd built. He watched her step into the light, powerful and graceful and completely at peace. And he understood, finally and completely, that the Tesla had been the best thing that could have happened to both of them. Because it had forced them to be honest. It had destroyed the false confidence and the comfortable negligence. It had created consequences, and consequences were what made people real, what made them capable of genuine transformation, what made them able to help others. The pool was gone, the Tesla was long gone, the lawsuit was ancient history. But the lessons remained, the growth remained, the compassion remained. And in a way, the Tesla remained too, not as a car, but as a story. The story of what happened when you trust someone wrong, when you fail them, when you both have to figure out how to move forward together, separately, but with enough grace to eventually understand that everyone needs a second chance. That was the real Tesla, that was the real pool. That was what they would both carry for the rest of their lives, into whatever came next.